Welcome,
Fanfare?
welcome, Jamila. That was the fanfare. Was that not sufficient fanfare?
I thought there was going to be like a drum roll or
Like a
something. Maybe.
Jamila, thank you so much for doing this. I have good. I have 3 important questions for you before we even get going. These are fast twitch muscle questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Would you pick Katharine Hepburn or Julia Roberts?
Julia Roberts.
All right. Rolling Stones or Beatles?
It's Rolling Stones.
Would you rather read poetry or read a play?
Play. But I
Okay.
like both.
All right. Yeah, you can only pick one though. That's how it goes.
I'd go play.
Okay. I think poetry and play is interesting because like in high school, they always make you read poetry and plays and they don't tell you that's not how they're supposed to be performed.
Right. That's when like poetry's hard.
Yeah. I've
performative element. Like
I've seen,
play, I feel like you can cobble it together better.
That's true. I've seen poetry performed and it's 10 times as good as it is on the page.
This is not what we're here to talk about, but I did go to a poetry bout in Taos, New Mexico years ago, where they did like in a boxing ring and had poets like basically doing round for round. I'm old, so this is when like spoken word was very cool.
I think that you're not that old. When spoken word was really cool was like 1934 or something.
Yeah, I'm old enough. I'm just saying, to your point about performative poetry, and there were like 2 very different poets. One, a guy named Sherman Alexie, who's Native American and a novelist, but also a poet. And then this other guy named Saul Williams, who's very much like this sort of hip hop poetry. And it was just interesting because initially I was like, oh, Saul's gonna beat him. But their styles were different, but like equally impactful. And it was literally like a boxing ring with a microphone. It was very performative and it was cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what you need to take if we were teaching high school. That's what we would need to take our high school kids to see first. And then you can talk about like, well, now we're going to read some of this and you'll create your own. But remember that it's meant to be performed out loud. I kind of deliberately didn't give your title to the at the beginning because I wanted to read your current title. I don't want to take away from your clout because Jamila has done she's worked at ABC, she's worked at Bravo, she's now at Freeform, but I had kind of a chuckle at the way that you're described online now because it says Jamila Hunter has been named, this was from a report about
What
this.
is it? What does it say?
It's from Variety from a while ago. Jamila Hunter has been named Senior Vice President of Current Series and Alternative Programming at Freeform. In her new role, Hunter will report to Freeform's Lauren Carrero, Executive Vice President of Original Programming and Development. And you know what strikes me about that is like, did you ever, when you were a kid, I always thought there was just one vice president. Has it been weird working in the world of corporate America where there's like
executive vice presidents?
Right. It's so confusing.
I'm not even the top vice president. Kamala's the vice. She's higher than I am, you guys. There's a lot of vice presidents.
So what?
That's hilarious. I would have never thought about that until you read it out loud. And then you're like, and like literally there's an executive vice president before you would get to the president.
Really? Yeah. It's too many vice presidents. We need a new title.
It's a lot. Well, there's chairman, there's chancellors, there's all kind of titles. They're just making them up.
Right. Just to make people feel good or bad.
They call them commissioners in the UK, which I quite like. Controllers and commissioners.
Yeah. Commissioner has a pretty authoritative feel to it.
It does, but it feels more than like, again, there's 9 different vice presidents versus if you're like, I'm the commissioner.
Right.
That's it, dude. Like you're commissioning shit. I'm not supposed to curse. Sorry.
You can curse here. It's just if it's not allowed with you, that's fine. Okay, so with that in mind, your job title is confusing to simpletons like myself. If you were on a first date, let's say marriage blew up and you had to go on a first date, how would you explain your job?
I'm so old. I go on a first date. Sorry, I just got caught. I'm like, oh God, that would be so horrible. Okay, beyond the first date of it all. So I oversee the shows that are currently, I would say, on the air, but there's no shows because we're in a pandemic, but we'll go there later. Any shows that are on Freeform or Hulu, which is our streaming sister, that are in their second, third, fourth seasons. So whether that's Grownish, which is the Blackish spinoff in college, we have a show called The Bold Type, where they're working in New York at a magazine. So those shows are in their third, fourth, whatever seasons. Those shows I oversee. There's another department that does development. So those are all pilots. Like those are little seedlings of ideas. If you were to pitch a show, you would pitch it to development, but only the ones that get on the air come to my department. So that's cool. And then alternative is literally like the made up name that every place has for anything that's not a comedy or drama. So whether that's a reality show, a documentary, a special, we're doing animation on scripted, but we're doing some on my side. So literally alternative is a catch-all for anything that's not a traditional scripted comedy or drama.
Got it. One thing that we want to get back to at some point is talking about, like, I think it's really interesting to talk to you because you have a atmospheric level vision of what works and what doesn't. And so at some point I want to come back to what works for certain stories, what you see that functions well, the characteristics of people who make it. But before that, I would like you to dig into the memory banks and tell us, if you are willing, about your biggest flop or failure. What's the biggest whiff you've made, either in guidance or just in picking a person or anything that obviously we don't want you to say this Franklin Rumpelstein that I plucked out of Kenosha, Wisconsin was a huge mistake. But anything that comes to mind as far as like, it just didn't go like you thought it would. And maybe what you learned from that.
There are many. So that's the only reason I looked up was I was like, there's not a one. Like there's a lot of them. I mean, you're all writers and creators. There's no one answer. You know, like we're not working in a scientific field where there's like that, oh no, this is what's connected to the knee bone. And if you cut the wrong thing. So what's right and wrong is subjective. And I would say this is my best answer to your question when I say I don't have one story of it, because I don't want to say many, but they all go back to the same thing. And it usually means I wasn't listening to the creator. Any mistake I made, and whether that mistake was like fighting for a title or, you know, but like any of the decisions you make in my job around, advocating for, again, whether that's a creator, whether that's a marketing campaign, like any of these things, as you said, you don't really know. Everybody's just kind of figuring it out, going with their gut. Any moments that I've looked back on and went, I made the wrong call. I wasn't listening, and I wasn't like going with my gut. I was going with like what sounded right, I was being safe is what I would say. And this isn't a flop, but this is what I would use as an example of something I learned from when we bought Blackish when I was at ABC. It's, you know, development's hard, as I said, like you develop a lot, not everything gets there. And I think Blackish was like it was on the script, but we never really talked about it as a title. And until you pick something up and it starts to go to press, you're just kind of moving. And then all of a sudden we're like, are we calling it that? And I told Kenya we shouldn't do it. I was like, I don't think we should call it that. It's too risky. It's too scary. People aren't going to like it. We have a good show. I don't want any heat we get for it. Like I was honestly, like I was scared. Like I knew we had a good show and I didn't want people to react negatively to the title and never be able to buy it back. And he had a very strong point of view about why he wanted that word. And luckily we had a president at that time that did listen and was like, okay, we need to work with marketing and work with PR and figure out a way to position it. And it was the right choice. And so I used that to say it wasn't because it flopped, but it was because my instinct in that moment wasn't to go, oh, he wants to do something different. Let's be strategic about how to do it. I went to safety mode of like, yeah, it's scary. And I learned from my boss, who wasn't that person, who was like, I jokingly call him a cowboy, because he was like, Blackish, let's do this. And I was like, what? But why? Because it was more on the line for me, not me, but there's not that many Black shows that get that opportunity. So I was scared that if we didn't launch it right, and you don't get those opportunities often, we wouldn't get to live, if that makes sense. So that's my long-winded way of saying, I don't know that they're flops, but they're moments that I look at and go, oh, I was more driven by fear than I was by listening. And anything that good had come out of that show came from Kenya's gut. And supporting that was what got us through, not fear, if that makes sense.
In talking about like your instinct, so there must come times where your gut starts to scream in whatever situation, this is a bad idea, this person's about to make a mistake. And for whatever reason, it was landing in my head, thinking about how in a lot of ways you often have to get out of the way. You have to put your ego aside and say, well, look, I gave them the advice and now I just have to sort of move on. Right. So how do you phrase it when you're like, this is my ultimate veto, you don't want to do this? Have you come up with like ways to explain that?
Mine that I don't know that I use this, but I've definitely used this when I was younger. And I actually believe it. My name is not on any of these shows. It's not my name. And I don't get the check either, right? Like my check is the same, whether you take this suggestion or not. Your name is on it. Your check is different if this is a hit or a flop. So I literally will say, I will give this as my best advice, but ultimately it's your name and it's your show. So you make the decision you want to make. That usually gives people pause, because then they do stop and go, right, it is my name. It is mine out there. And again, it's not mine. Like nobody's ever going to blame me for it, really. You're the one out there with it. So the times I've done that have been the ones I've usually been able to then have a calm conversation on the other. Not that there's fighting, because that's just not my style, but at basic levels, when I'm able to say to someone, okay, if you feel good about this, you should do it because it is your name on it and it's your show. They usually stop for a minute and go, am I just fighting to fight, or do I really believe in this? That makes sense.
Yeah. I do want to back up a little bit, because I know that one of my missions is always to demystify these processes as much as possible, right? So, when I was growing up in Kansas, I would not have known that there was someone like you at, whether it was ABC or Freeform or Fox or wherever, that would be in these roles. So I do want to briefly explain how you and I know each other, because I think that might also inform how this process works. After I got a book deal for my first book, which was based on my basketball career, through a series of events, I managed to get a TV agent, and he said, why don't you come up with an idea for a TV show? So through that, got a television agent and was packaged with a writer and director. And we went to pitch this show to 20th Century Fox. And as I remember it, Jamila, you can jump in as to when exactly we met each other. But I was kind of interested to learn how we needed to first pitch this to the production company. And then the production company kind of needed to get the go ahead from the network that would then air it. Like that was very new to me, because I would not have thought that there were these two separate entities.
A lot of vice presidents that had to get
right, that had to give it the non-veto, I suppose. So in your current role, I know that, there's a couple of different roles depending on which hat you're wearing. Where do you feel like what percentage do you come in on the product? Do you know what I mean? Like if 1% is the person just thought of the idea, and 100% is Seinfeld's now in syndication and it's done, what's your swath?
My personal one, or
yeah.
Well, I think the point you made is exactly right, of that, like, depending on where I was working, I was in different parts of that process. So again, when you and I met, I was on the studio part of it, which meant, as you said, there were like multiple layers before anything got done. What I like about being on the buying side is that you're, there's only like 2 more layers. It's much closer is what I would say.
Right.
So for sure, depending on whether you're at a streamer, now the environment has changed so much. And so many of these companies continue to sort of merge and like it's hard to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like who's really the person that can make a decision that's going to make or break my show. Ultimately, it runs every company is going to be different. That's what I would say. So again, on the current side, on the series that are already on the air, when I say it's easier, I mean there's less scrutiny because they're on the air already. Like the bigger scrutiny was on the development side. So in my ABC job, like I said, when you're going to do 8 pilots and 2 series, like every decision you make, it was me, my boss, and the president. There was, kind of 3 of us that were the first lines of defense about it. Now with the current shows, there's just less because your show's going. If you're grownish, you've proven you have a track record. So if they come in and say, we want to add a new character, we go, great. We talk about it. It's just less scrutiny, if that makes sense. There's less cooks in the kitchen once the show is on the air and proven than there is in the beginning. Like on my first season shows, there's 900 people giving notes. I have one right now that I'm like, oh my God, there's so many people. Because it's the first season, they're still figuring it out. Development's still kind of on it. My boss is on it. My team is on. There's a lot of people. Versus, like I said, if you get to grownish, there's like 2 executives, and I chime in occasionally.
Mm-hmm. It's like when you have your first child and all of the grandparents come for so long, but then by the 3rd kid, they're like, you got this. We don't care anymore. Right. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine like how to explain this idea that like, because to me it's sort of counterintuitive to think that like a production company theoretically makes this thing and then the network has to show the thing, and those aren't necessarily connected, although sometimes becoming more so just because of mergers and all of the stuff that's happening. And so I guess it's sort of like if I'm a shoe designer and I want my shoe to get into Foot Locker, for lack of a better, I haven't been to a shoe store in 10 years. So it's the first shoe store that comes to mind. I need to find somebody who's going to like make that shoe. And then they're going to say, hey, Foot Locker, if we make a bunch of this shoe, will you like put it in your store? So I think that's one thought on like how people can understand that it's not going to go that you are going to walk up to the president of ABC and say, hey, I have this show idea. Do you guys want to make it? There's a lot of steps in the way, and that can be intimidating. But what's good about it is there's a lot of liaisons, I assume, because that's a French word, that there's a better way to make that plural, but I just made it American and said liaisons. The good news is there's a lot of ways to hook on. And I'm coming around to a question for you, Jamila.
All right, bring it around.
What is the path for a person listening to this right now, the best path for them to get a show to you someday? Not like your email address or something like that, but like what's the way that you think, if I'm trying to get a show into the world, how do I get that done starting at 0?
I'm sure for any of you that have heard me talk to Paul in conversations before, but I actually think the example I use more than the traditional, like go to an agent, because we didn't even talk about production companies, because there's production companies that have deals at studios and the studios to the network. Like that's a whole other thing. I think in this current environment, one of the most powerful tools is actually making the thing. So whether that's putting a short film up, or I saw like a headline about that director that did that Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like a whole other version of the Fresh Prince opening, who there was like a bidding war for his, I don't even know what the bidding war is for. Like I said, I literally just saw the log line and the headline for the piece, but he's a director and he made a piece and everybody knows the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the like bright, shiny version of it. And he did like the edgy version of it, and he's got a deal, and like Hollywood came to him. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of you saw, there was a kid. Anyway, I think you can make things now, and especially with, I'm going to pretend we're not in a pandemic, but in an environment where the technology is there, that if you're a writer, but your friend is a director and this extra person wants to be an actress, that sort of film school mentality of like, let's make something and putting it on the internet or putting it on, God forbid, TikTok, like any of these things that are used right now for a lot of like gossip are also distribution vehicles. And I would say the things that I get from my friend in Georgia saying, hey, here's what I'm watching, holds as much water to me as the stuff I get from agents all day, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And one thing I think that's important for people to remember is that I've heard this a lot in the world of books. A literary agent is hoping for successes. They want to see something that comes across their desk that makes them go, oh shit, like I gotta read more of this and I want to go sell this. And in the same way, you're a human being who's looking for things that entertain you and catch your eye and catch your attention. It's not like you're in the business of just saying no. You want things that will work. And I think sometimes people can kind of get that backwards in their heads, right? Because they get rejections or they hear of rejections. And so it becomes frightening to think of like, well, if I submit this thing and get rejected, it's going to destroy me.
Right. It's the worst part of our job. One, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not some people who aren't fazed by it, but it is a lot of passing, which is not fun. The best parts of your job are those parts, as you said, when you see that thing on YouTube and go, this person's amazing. Or that's, for me as a developer and definitely somebody who worked in comedy for a long time, seeing a comedian that you're like, oh, that person's really interesting before they become Eddie Murphy or Chris Rock, like that's your job. So that is where, again, I think that there is the traditional avenue of like, get an agent and get a package, legitimately, I saw Issa Rae's digital series, The Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl, again, not from an agent. I saw it from my college roommate in Atlanta, Georgia, who doesn't own a TV, and sent me the link and was like, I know you watch work in TV. I don't watch that, but here's what I do watch. And I then found her. She was crowdfunding the second season, I think Pharrell and a bunch of other people. But again, because it was African-American women telling stories that nobody else was telling, people were watching. So when I then went to my boss to say, we should buy a script from this person, even though no agents are calling you, I could show them all of the people that were crowdfunding another season for her. And Shonda Rhimes had seen what she did online, and Shonda didn't even do comedy. And Shonda was like, oh, I want to be a part of that. So I say that to say, again, obviously you've seen what she's done with her career, but she made something, and what she made an audience found and supported. So then the people in my job went, oh, wait, that voice, if it just went through the system, it would have gotten watered down. Like, it would have taken her forever to get her own show. But because she made it, she didn't have to staff on anybody else's show.
Yeah. You know, like one thing that comes to mind there is the stand-up comedy scene, right? So in stand-up, you do have to go through the wars of like figuring out, does this stuff work?
Right.
First of all, is it funny? Does it make people laugh? And then you kind of work your way up the ladder. And I think the value of that is then when you do arrive at a spot where there's 1,500 people there, you're ready for it. Similarly, if you've been making your own stuff, you're also more equipped then to deal with like, oh, now somebody's going to ask me to make more stuff and do it on a weekly basis and on some sort of routine. Whereas I could imagine if you just pluck somebody that you think is funny and you're like, all right, now write a show. They're like, oh shit, I got to make people laugh and do this day after day after day.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility, which, it is a separate conversation, but there's nothing that I like more than seeing, Robin Thede, who I've known for a lot of years, and seeing her, like, you see people in the comedy club doing or writing, or the Lonely Island guys did like a super low budget thing at 20th, Paul, like around the time we did 12th Man, called Awesome Town, for like no money. And it was bonkers. Like, it was super bonkers, but it was really, really funny. And there was something there, right? They were like, I think they went to SNL maybe the year after that. So I say that to say they were making stuff, right? Like, even when we did our pilot at 20th, they had been doing stuff on the internet that made the producers say, hey, these guys are funny. let's do something with them. So anyhow, I think the long-winded way of saying, if you're a creator, whether you're a writer, producer, performer, make things and people will find you. Make it and put it out there. And it is that sort of like, as you're saying, you're learning that. For me as an executive, I'm not looking at it going, it needs to be perfect. I'm looking going, oh, that person has a voice, or that person has something unique to say. And that gets through the clutter of like an email with a bunch of scripts in it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So one thing we talked about in the lead up to this was getting you to speak to this idea of what works to you about certain stories. What is the thing that usually catches your attention about the way it could be the structure of stories? It could be the way that you react to characters. And mostly, I think it's important to keep in mind that I'm just interested in your view of this. This doesn't have to be the global, this is what works about story. I just want to know, like, what has been the common theme in the things that work to you?
That's a different question. You said, what do I like? Then you said, what is the theme and what works?
Works for you. What works for you? Yeah.
Well, I'm also an avid reader and I was an English major. So I'm definitely like, I love inventive methods of storytelling. Just from a point of view, for sure. Just meaning somebody having a very distinctive point of view or saying something about the world that you're like, is surprising or makes you think about things differently. I love. I'm actually very into podcasts right now, as I'm sure, people are for different reasons. But to me,
a fitting remark by you.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, it's not, I don't know.
Because this is a podcast, Jamila. Yes, well, this is a fitting.
I'm promoting you. But from a storytelling perspective, what I was going to say is I think some of the most inventive, like, structural things are happening in podcasts. Like, so I think I get really excited, not just when I hear a story that's very inventive or surprising or makes me think, but when the approach to the way the story is told is very unique. Like, there's all sorts of ways that people can talk about Serial when it first came out, but that could have been unveiled in a very linear fashion. And maybe it would have been as interesting, but it wasn't. And S-Town was the same thing. Like, those were two that were like riveting. And I was like, those are journalists. Like, that's amazing. These are real life stories, but the choices they're making editorially in terms of how to unfold those stories are part of what's creative about them. So I've literally been like, we should have those podcast people talk to our writers, because I think there's something interesting about, again, not just story, but structure. That to me, I find intriguing, but that's really hard.
It is.
You're all writers. That's hard.
Yeah. To always to hold enough, to give the audience enough of a sense of what's going on while also holding something in reserve. Okay, let's get into some audience questions. Guys, if you would like to get in on these questions, toss them into the little Q&A hole, and we'll get to.
Am I supposed to click on this, or you're?
No, you don't have to do anything. You just hang out. You just
hang out.
Be quizzed.
Everyone, put in the chat what color curtain you think Paul should get for the next.
Me, yeah, my pale face and his pale curtains. Too many pale things. Okay, Vincent wonders this: any suggestions for that first-time writer with their first-time opportunity on how much to push back and listen to their gut?
Sorry, Paul, you were very dramatic with that.
I know. I made it sound like.
Wait, who is the question from? You didn't even give me a name or anything.
I said it's from Vincent. You said at the very beginning of this, it's your biggest mistake is not listening. And then there you go, not listening.
It's true. I'm sorry.
Vincent wondered that.
Hello, Vincent. Oh, Gretchen's in there. What's up, girl? No, I'm just kidding. See, there's like little comments coming up.
Yeah, you don't worry about that. That's beneath you.
But it's popping up. Okay.
Yeah.
That is for sure something Paul's heard me talk about before. And for sure, I think one of the most interesting challenges that all creatives have around collaboration and all of the partners that come into play. once your show, knock on wood, gets bought. And the thing that I would say is two things that I've learned from my various positions. And one of them being really honestly when I worked at the studio, where you're a seller, right? So as Paul said, like we can love an idea, but if we don't find a network or a streamer to distribute it, it doesn't matter if we loved it. So you got to have somebody on that side rooting for it. But my boss at the time used to always, we would say to our writers, like, take a Post-it note and write on it, like, the essence of your project. Like, what is essential that you, if you compromise it, you have lost your voice. And I'm not saying it's one thing, but you know what I'm saying. If your piece is a character, I don't know, what is the essence? And as you're going through the notes process and the navigation of it all, if it gets to that, you should say no. And if they don't want it, they're not the right home for it. And that doesn't mean you have to handle that notion in a way that is confrontational or nasty. Because I think people automatically think of that as like, you're going to burn a bridge. If we don't take that note, we've burned a bridge. Nobody's going to work with me, da, 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 da. I genuinely say to people, any writer that's going to take every note, I don't want to work with. Because that means you stand for nothing. Like it's that whole, if you fall for everything, you stand for nothing. My expectation is that I bought an idea from somebody with a vision. So just because I go, purple elephants might be fun, if you're like, no, they wouldn't be at this circus. It's your circus, not mine. So I'm not saying every executive is of the same philosophy as me, and how you articulate your vision and why it doesn't sync is part of the skill set of learning. Most writers I know will tend to say, if you're on a call, and you'll get notes that are crazy, like it's gonna happen. And you just say, let me think about that and I'll get back to you. So like you buy yourself some time, mute the phone and you're like, that's not the show, I hate them, or whatever you do. And then you come up with a response, or your producing partner responds. So the right way of like why you're not going to take the note and how to communicate that is actually one of the places I've seen there being very effective allies. You know, as you were saying, Paul, like having a studio and a producing partner so that the writer doesn't have to be the guardian of all of it. You can kind of deploy them in different ways. But ultimately for you as a writer, genuinely, if it's not your vision, you're going to be unhappy with it. If you take if the notes you're getting aren't in sync. And that's why I said it goes back to like the executive's job to listen. You could be on two different pages. And I always say to people, it's better, you may think it's horrible you didn't sell your show. The process of developing it somewhere where they don't get your voice is horribly, horribly unfulfilling, and nothing good comes from it. And I've 100 times said to people, like bosses, where we've heard a pitch, and what'll happen is, and I've been in these rooms, we may have been in a meeting where the chairman says, I want to find X. And then somebody comes in and pitches you, and there's 2% of what that chairman said, like 2% of an ensemble in it, but 98% of a character study about one person. And you go, well, let's buy it and make it an ensemble. No, they don't want an ensemble. They want to do a character study about that one guy. And you're going to sell it to us, and we're going to be mad at you, and you're going to be as frustrated with us, and it's not going to go forward. And that whole process will have not been productive, if that makes sense. So that's where I go back to the listening is important on both sides for us as the buyer, and for you, if again, the people buying your show are saying to you, oh, well, you know, we really want an ensemble, and you know you don't want that, don't do it, dude. It's going to be a bad ride. That's my long-winded way of saying, know what your show is and find the home that is in sync with that, but you have to be clear on it. And again, fighting over stuff that's minutia doesn't help, but if it starts to cut into the essence of your show, those are the places to push back. And any buyer worth their salt wants a writer to have an opinion.
Do you ever put in booby trap notes where you're like, if they take this note, I'm done?
No, nobody has time for that.
But that'd be kind of fun.
You do that for like standards and practices. Like you put stuff in that's overtly sexual or violent to get the stuff you want. That
right.
Not with your writers. No.
Well, good. You passed my booby trap test.
No.
You were talking about like telling people that you'll think about their notes. That reminds me of at some point when I was a kid, I noticed that my mom, when we asked her permission for things, would always be like, well, I'll think about that. And at some point in my development, I realized like, hey mom, what's going on with I'll think about that? We must have told you 1,000 things that you were going to think about. And she was like, oh, that was a no. I was just going to make sure you forgot about it. Right. I was basically saying like, if this matters to you enough that you ask me again in 2 days, then maybe we'll talk about it. But probably because you're 4, you're going to forget about this terrible idea. And I think that's how it works for executives as well.
It works.
Okay, let's get into the big question that people are always going to want to know the answer from or to. And this comes from Dewan. He wonders, how do you get a TV agent? It's a big question, Dewan, and Jamila is equipped to give you the best answer.
You got to ask an agent. Do you have agents come here? You know, I've honestly asked my friends.
Check. Do we have any agents? No, we don't have any agents right now. It's just you.
You had one before, though,
hey,
right?
Hey, look. Dewan wants to know the answer.
No, I will tell. I will tell you what I know of it, Dewan. But honestly, every agent's different. And I ask my friends that are agents and managers, because it really each of them is like running their own little business. Mm-hmm. So you really want to get, which I think sometimes feels antithetical to people because they think they want the big fancy agent. You don't. Like, you want the hungry junior agent that's trying to sign new people and is trying to make a name for themselves, because they're, number one, the ones that are going to read you. Number two, the ones that are going to be really hungry and pitch you. And the ones that are the fancy names aren't doing that anymore. You know what I mean? Like, they have a bunch of people making money already. So I tend to say to people that it's literally like the junior agents and the managers that you want to, and some of them, they call it like pocket represent you. So they're trying to prove to their agency that they can like bring in clients. So those, if you target them and they sort of like start pocket representing you, that's them showing their bosses that they're on to cool talent. Mm-hmm. And they're incentivized to bring business into their agency. Again, the harder thing is, I don't know how you find them. Like, I don't know that you just call up an agency and say, hey, who are your junior agents? So that I need to find out about. But that is my suggestion to people, is looking for the like junior agents or the ones who are newer, because they're the ones that are hungry and still need to build their business.
And as we often talk about here in Los Angeles with a lot of people, so much of it is making friends, right? So when Jamila and I met, we were, I don't know how old we were, but it was probably now 15 years ago. And there were a lot of people that worked on this TV show that we made. But she and I hit it off, probably because that she was really good at rolling her eyes at insane things that were happening, which is kind of was my just general affect throughout, because I had never thought I would work in TV at all. And so I spent a lot of time going like, what is wrong with these people? And she was an excellent.
I never did that. What are you talking about?
She was an excellent audience for my eye rolls. There were a lot of people, as I said, who worked on that show, but she and I just connected, right? And so we have stayed in touch. That's not going to happen with everybody. And I think it takes meeting a lot of people and trying to connect with a lot of people in exactly the same way that making friends or dating or whatever, getting a job means those things. And that it isn't necessarily a failure if you didn't connect with the first agent you meet or the first manager or whatever it is, that it's always going to take stirring the pot a bunch and meeting a whole bunch of people.
For sure. And it is, I think, your point about chemistry. When I was saying that my friends that are agents or managers, I've asked them, like, how do you decide? Because if they take on a client, I think similar to what you said, Paul, about, I think people can think about executives as like, oh, they just want to pass and reject us. When it's like literally like any executive I know is looking for that diamond in the rough to advocate for. Like, our jobs are only as fulfilling as us finding projects and ideas we're passionate about to advocate for. if we don't have that, then passing all day, like we're not villains in a Disney movie. I mean, some people might be, but the majority of my counterparts, that's why I feel like we just need a PR, redo. The world has bigger problems right now, but I would say the same for agents and managers. They know that if they take on a client, they need to love that client's material because they got to sell them. Like they have to be a salesman. They got to cold call a bunch of agents and producers and managers and executives like me and sell you. So if they don't click with you, if they don't like your work, they're not a good fit for you either. Mm-hmm. So it's like, to your point about the sort of dating notion of like, it's a commitment. Like most people I know have been with their managers or agents for a long, long time. And it was like back in the day when they'd never had a job, but that person believed in them and it's like we're ride or die together. So I think your point about it's not going to be everybody, and it shouldn't be everybody because not everybody's going to click with you in that way that they're going to be a relationship for you. And that's what your agent or manager should be, is a relationship that as you're building your career, they're going to be your biggest cheerleader, tell you the truth, and really be an advocate for you. I know there's I need an agent to pitch me. There's nothing worse, and I say this as an executive who gets pitched clients, than that agent that has a laundry list and that is just going to call you and run through a list of people who need a job. I, any day, respect the agents that are only going to call me about 2 people because I know that they care about those 2 people and know their material and aren't just checking a box.
One more question from Dave, who wonders this, and I think this is kind of an interesting entry point. He asks the very simple question of, are multicam comedies still in demand? For those who are not completely aware, multicam is sort of the more traditional sitcom like Cheers, where there are many cameras and sort of a stage like a play. And single cam usually means that it's sort of following the action around and could be shot anywhere. So, Jamila, are people interested in multicams?
And there's an audience.
And there's usually a live audience.
I'm going to stop using the pandemic that we're in, but yes, in the world of the real world / other world, multicams usually have an audience. They don't always, but usually there's an audience. So when you hear a laugh track, those are usually multicam shows. Yes. And again, I don't only do comedy anymore, but for sure. And the thing about it, I would say that's a bit of a disconnect with Hollywood versus the audience is, I think, single camera, as Paul was saying, the more filmic looking shows that are shot, they got very trendy. So for in the creative community, it felt cooler to do. And I don't know that it all goes back to The Office, but it kind of does a little bit as like the comedy landscape shifted from the sort of Friends, Will and Grace, like multicams with pretty people. When NBC did The Office and like My Name is Earl and these sort of like single camera filmic shows where people were like flawed and not perfect, like the comedy landscape just started changing. And now obviously you have streamers and cable outlets where you have shows like Remy and, there's all sorts of different tones. So they tend to be closer to movies, even from a tonal perspective, where they're not as jokey. Again, you can watch, why am I forgetting? It doesn't matter. Like you all know what sort of things are on the streamers that can be a half hour, like Atlanta. Is it a comedy? Not really, but it's a half hour. So I think the tones and all of that has definitely started evolving over time, where multicams are still, as Paul said, usually on a stage, shot with multiple cameras. There's going to be a laugh track. They're very much more clearly joke driven. But when I say there's a divide, I think in the like creative community, people look down on those. Mm-hmm. They're like, ugh, multicam. They're so whatever. I don't know. Again, my mom ran a theater company, so I love theater. So to me, a great multicam is still timeless. Like when I talked earlier about a Seinfeld or Friends, or again, Big Bang ran forever. Like the shows that are the most successful ratings wise and financially are actually multicams. even in ABC where I left, like our spinoff of Roseanne the Connors is doing the best for them. And that is a multi-camera comedy. So I think the challenge of it is less about people buying it and more about executing it in a way that feels a little more sophisticated than it's typically approached. But if there were a million writers that wanted to write them and actors that wanted to do them, there would be more of them. Because all networks know they're cheaper to make, they sell more international, they're better revenue drivers for business. And honestly, the ratings are, I'm not gonna say better overall, I'm kind of oversimplifying, but I'm not really. Again, like CBS has had a very profitable lineup and there are a lot of multicams. Most people just haven't been able to crack it. But when you get a really good one, again, you get the best of both worlds. Like they're profitable and I think you get a broader audience. So that's my long-winded way of saying, yes, there's an appetite for them. There tend to be not many writers that want to do it.
Which might be a weakness in the market that people could get into.
100%.
Okay, the last question is sort of a fun one. Actually, there's two questions. Avery wondered why his questions are being skipped. Avery, I'm not skipping your questions. There's just a lot of questions, and I can't get to everybody. Nicole, or Nicolay, I'm sorry if I screwed up your name. She asks the question that we're going to finish on, which is, what do you like best about your position? And what's your favorite thing about working in this field, the field that you work in? A heartening question to end on.
It's a good one. It's a good one to end on as I look at all the reading I have to do tonight. Genuinely, the best part is working with really, really talented creative people. 100%. Like any day that I'm like, oh, these jobs are killers, because I'm in so many meetings, I get paid to work with smart, funny people or creative people. And that is the best part of our job. So for me, and like when I said that what's been interesting for me to work in current, even though it hasn't been that long, as different from development, which I've typically done, where development, you like build a toy, and by a toy, I mean a show. And then you kind of like, you're sort of with it the first season, you start to hand it off to new parents, and then you got to go build again. They're like, build some more. So you just drop it. So to be able to live with the show and go, oh, wait, this is season 5. And now what built those worlds and those stories, like that's the best part. So for me, that's a lot of fun. Like beyond that, my best day is to be able to go, oh, I don't have any notes, but can we just talk about that episode? I would do that all day. And I'm sure some of them are like, oh, she's just shining me on. But I 100% came to Freeform because I liked the shows. And Paul's known me a long time. I just was like, I want to work someplace that makes shows that I like and that I want to watch. And that I want to talk to those people all day.
That is an excellent answer. And this has been an excellent interview. And I appreciate... You gotta
give me Tyler's question now, Paul. That's just rude.
No. I answered his question. And his name wasn't Tyler. It was Avery.
Oh, there was a Y in it.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Avery.
Avery, Tyler. Avery can stay mad at me. He shan't be mad at you because you've done the Lord's work.
Okay, it didn't even rhyme. I have no excuse.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. Agents and executives aren't all jerks. They really want to support you and want to be your cheerleaders. It is a hard system out there, but again, the only thing I can say is, as Paul was saying, the genuine notion of seeing those people as people that are collaborators for you as opposed to like enemies, I think is a healthier way to approach it. I'm not going to lie and say there's not a lot of those people, but any producer I know, any executive I know, all of those people, as Paul said, are looking for that project that they can champion and be a part of.
So go out and make the project that they want to champion.
Do it.
Thanks, Jamila.
Stay
Talk
safe.
to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.